Well, actually, during the military, I was going to ISU and started off, of course, just general courses. And then by the time I got to where I could start to take the courses that would be to my future profession of engineering, I started, like I say, I used the military for finances, and I pretty much used up all my savings, and so I had to work and go to school part-time, and that extended it out. So instead of a 4-year course, it was starting to get down to a 8-year course. And during that time, though, I managed to get through an associate degree, a 2-year degree in engineering. But after that, the courses came harder and further between, and while I was going, things changed in the engineering industry. When I started, you could get an associate degree and then go right to work, and most of the schools would pay for your education to a bachelor's degree. Well, things got pretty rough for the engineers, in fact for the whole country. And we was watching television one day, and it showed engineers with master's degree out on the street in the big cities selling pencils. It got that bad, so many had been laid off. So I didn't think my associate degree would get me very far. And so I started branching out into taking courses other than the normal straight down the engineering line. And one of them I took was computer programming, back in the real old antique computers, where it was all cards and and reading them in, and you had separate printers to even different machines for the printer. And it was just starting to replace the unit record equipment, where everything was done on cards, and you had to run your punch your programs up on a stack of cards, read it in, and then punch your data up on a stack of cards and read that in. The program would do its thing, and then it would punch the answers out on a deck of cards. And then you'd take the deck of cards over and stick it in a machine that was a printer. And it was the modern one. We could do a whole line of printing instead of just like a typewriter, one character at a time. It had big bars in it, 100 bars across, and had the alphabet, the numbers, and the special characters typed like on a typewriter, the characters down the bars. And then as it read your card, one card at a time, it would align all these bars up to print one line of print. And then a hammer would come forward and pow, and print the line of print. While those bars were up, we used to kid about it looking like the skyline in New York City. And so after taking the computer class, about the next year I heard of them wanting a computer programmer in Twin Falls with Sierra Life Insurance. And so I applied for it, got the job, and that ended my college education, although all through my years after that I had to keep going to schools to upgrade my education. Well, that was back in the old days where computers filled a whole room, and they really weren't very high speed, but they were a lot faster than a pencil. So after school I went to Sierra Life Insurance, and we were programming. They had bought a package, or were going to buy a package that the software did insurance type of processing, and they were going to buy a small IBM computer. But as we worked on it, and I was living up there, and at first I was commuting back and forth from Pocatello to Twin Falls until Ann and them were able to move up. We had bought a trailer when we got married, a trailer house, and so I was living in the trailer house in Twin Falls, and Ann was, and the boys were living with their grandma and grandpa in Pocatello. So there became a incident where the auditor for the state, and this particular auditor that came to audit Sierra Life happened to have part interest in another insurance company, small insurance company in Boise, and it was actually in competition with ours. So he comes there and gets all the things that the state required for him, a private room and availability to all the records and everything. So here you got a competitor looking through all your material. And when we got there, they gave him our room, so we had to go to a storeroom in the back. And while we was there, we was by the back door, and every day he'd come in the front door, walk through the office, not being too nice to all the girls in the office. Back then we didn't have laws to arrest them. And then he'd go down to the office, close the door and lock it, and then he'd after he'd been there just a short time, he'd slip out that office down the back hall past our room, out into the alley where some guy would meet him in a pickup truck, and they'd be gone until late afternoon. He'd come back, slip past us into his room, be there a short time, then walk back through and harass all the ladies in the office. And that was his daily routine. And he filed bad reports and everything, and so it got to a point that the state wouldn't let our insurance company sell insurance in the state. Well, you can imagine any other state we was in, if that happened in our home state, what was going on in the others. So they had to cancel their order on the computer and on that insurance system. But we had been working on the package for the insurance system to get it ready for when our computer came in, we could just drop it in. But we were just about done with that, so I knew that package pretty good. And so when they canceled the computer, they had to lay us off. They called me in and asked me if I'd like to work in their actuary department. And I says, well, no, I kind of got interested in the computers. I'd like to stay in it, so I had to leave. The other guy, there was only two of us as programmers. The other guy, he took the job. Later years, I met him, and with what happened to the insurance company, he wished he hadn't have stayed. But I kept tabs of them in the news, and after several years, the state dropped all charges against him, but only after this guy that was the auditor had retired. Then they went in and looked, and they couldn't find anything to justify it. By that time, of course, the company had no new business. The old business was starting to die off, and the company was in pretty bad straits. Financially, they'd forced them into that, and so they sold the company to another insurance company. And so talk about political politics and business, and that's what happened. So when I left, I got a job with Garrett Freight Lines back in Pocatello, so we moved back to Pocatello. And I worked in their computers. They had an old computer that was even older, as a 1401, which was older than the 360 that we would have got in at Sierra Life. And the old 1401, that was comical. But, so I won't even go into that. But we then eventually bought a 360, and so I got to go into the 360 computer and program for it. And one of my first big projects was to redo their payroll system. Under the old computer, there wasn't a whole lot of security, so the head of the computer department did the payroll all by himself on real old, what the unit record equipment that I told you about earlier, that in my schooling, that each machine did one little job and would read cards in, punch cards out, take the cards to the next one and the next one, and then partway through you'd have to run it through a sorter that would sort it into the order you want, and then eventually it got to one that printed, like these old printers I was telling you about, although by this time they'd updated the printer that instead of these bars that went up, they were on wheels. So you had 100 wheels across there that had the characters on it. And that was, he was doing all of that, and it'd take him days to get everything recorded and run through. And so I took a few weeks and programmed a payroll system that calculated the state taxes, the federal taxes, and for the different states, and kept track of where our employees lived. And I could run then the computer and the payroll, and they had ways of security there then, and I could run that through and have the payroll done in a couple of hours, where it took him several days. And then there was several other big projects I had that was quite interesting to me, and even some of my my future employers had a little interest in. Especially the best one that helped me, though, was the taxes, state taxes and federal taxes that I did. And so at Garrett's, when it got to the point they deregulated the truck lines, that under regulation, the truck lines bought a tariff. And then that meant they were the truck line for a specific area. And in that area they had to charge certain amounts, which was negotiated with the government to set the prices. And that's the way they managed to build up, after the war, the trucking across the nation, to where we had interstate trucking. But a senator named Kennedy, Ted Kennedy to be exact, came along and said that was government fixed pricing. And at that time, fixed pricing was becoming a dirty word. Anytime they caught a company, two companies together fixing the prices, they had jail sentences for them and that. So they couldn't jail the government, so they stopped it. And with that, then we were just at the wrong size. We were too big to do just the local delivery, and we were too small to do the interstate, clear across the country. And so they another company, it was another company that had started to buy up these size trucking firms, the size of ours, and to build a big one that they could do the interstate. And they bought us up, and gradually was taking things over and building their central offices back in Michigan and later in Denver. And so ours was phasing out, and eventually then I had worked my way out of a job trucking, and we had small trucks that would do delivery around to the various businesses, delivering food and machinery and all kinds of products. And back in those days, most companies did not have warehouses and their own trucks. It kind of delivered to a warehouse type room where they warehoused out of. And then we also would pick up from those companies, and if they were selling wholesale, then we could haul their stuff across the country for them to wherever they were. It was being retailed out, and but since we were limited by the government tariffs, we could only haul just to a certain point, and then we'd have to they lots of times unload the trucks and the trailers and that, and another company that had the tariff would come along and they'd have to transfer the stuff over. But they started developing a trailer interchange, and I wrote the computer system for that to keep track of it, to where we would haul the stuff to a point, unhitch the trailer. That was a lot less work than having to unload it. And the other company had come in and pick up the trailer and take it. And they'd drop off their trailers and we'd take it. And you had to keep track of who had the trailer, because it was like the trailers were on lease at the time the other company had it. And there was a national agreement set up for that.